factories and warehouses and in business and in industry. And it is certainly a very important pillar in terms of industrialization, in terms of economic development, whether we're speaking from anything from manufacturing to tourism, and even in agriculture, energy. Electricity can, in fact, be important, and especially when you're speaking about agro-processing and agribusiness as the like. Our energy mix also includes, of course, high dependence on fossil fuels, both to generate that electricity which we're speaking about, and of course, a lot of it is done through the use of diesel engines at the power plants, but as well, our vehicles are also highly dependent on gasoline and diesel. And we have seen the impacts, of course, of the rising costs of energy and how we don't have a control over that because of the fact that we are effectively importing pretty much everything that we require for the purpose of energy. This is why, of course, steps towards renewable energy are so very important. Because if we can, in fact, transition away from that dependence on importing fuel, of course, it then means that we can generate more electricity locally from local sources available to us, whether those local sources may be the heat under the earth in the case of geothermal, whether it may be the sun that is irradiating on the surface of our land and our waters, and that is, of course, another potential source of energy, and as well the wind that blows onto our shores. And so it certainly is a sector that can be and has been identified as a significant game changer in terms of the way forward for development. Now, a lot of countries have realized this and are taking significant steps to do so. There is, in fact, of course, an environmental imperative of that the very environment that we depend on is, in fact, changing as a result of the energy sources of the past, so the energy sources of the present era, we should also say. And so, certainly over the past 200 years or so since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, we have seen an exponential rise in energy consumption. And so whereas an individual who may have been growing up in the 1800s, your footprint was fairly small. It really meant that you had a very limited space within which you would interact. The vast majority of people would have been born and would have quite possibly even died only within a radius of a few miles of the place where they are born. And they would have spent most of their life quite possibly engaged in farming, engaged in survival in that way. And what we've seen, of course, since as a result of globalization, industrialization, is far more people have increased their range, if you like, and their footprint, their energy footprint. Because now everybody is dependent on traveling to work now, and we travel further distances. If you look at a map of, say, Castries, for example, in the 1800s, you had a very, very, very dense area with a very small city of not even 100 acres, and everybody was very much packed into this very narrow space, and this was really where you had the bulk of the population living. It's no longer this way, thanks to the rise of automobiles, and people are living further and further and further away from where they work. And of course, people also want to explore more. They want to explore their country. They want to be able to explore the world. And so travel has boomed. Travel and tourism is now one of the leading industries in the world. And all of these things are, of course, greatly dependent on energy and the availability of energy. And of course, we've realized that we cannot simply be bringing forward this demand on fossil fuels into the foreseeable future. And why? Because number one, it is in fact a not a renewable resource, and potentially can in fact run out. And although, of course, that was a major fear of the past and was a major driver of a lot of discourse in the 1970s and 60s and 70s, the worry of when will fossil fuels run out. And that was, of course, a major reason why countries were looking to diversify and to find other sources of energy. That realization that cheap oil was, in fact, something that would not last forever. And certainly, even though we're seeing new oil finds in countries that did not traditionally were not thought of as oil producers, for example, Guyana has come into the mix. Suriname has come into the mix. Many countries in Africa now, like Ghana, are producing oil, and lots of other areas, Angola, for example. And so there's a lot of interest in new oil finds, yes, but invariably a lot of that oil is actually more difficult to actually extract from the sources where they're being taken from. A lot of it may be under the sea, and requires very complex ways to deal with it. And they're found in very deep sections of the water, not in shallow areas like in the past in the North Sea, which were easily exploitable. And that means that new technologies and greater expense has to be had to get the very same oil. And of course, the issues of quality of oil and how it can be extracted. So there have been lots and lots of advances, yes, that have helped in terms of extraction of those materials, whether it's through the shale oil and oil sands up in places like Canada and in the United States. That has become a major source of late. The use of fracking becoming a major methodology for the sourcing of oil, which has had its as well its controversies in many parts of North America and other parts of the world as well. And of course, every now and then we still see lots of debate over the use of coal. Coal, which had been a very important early source of energy. A lot of the steamships, of course, that plowed the seas in the 1800s and early 1900s, they would have been dependent on coal. And of course, most of the the power in the world, I shouldn't say most, but a very, very high proportion of the power plants in the world are still coal powered. And of course, extremely bad because of the extent of carbon dioxide that is actually released from coal. So there's been a lot of concern about energy and energy security as well, and what to do in the case of emergencies. Even in the United States of America, world's largest economy, world's largest, up until recently, I think the world's largest consumer of energy before China ascended. In fact, has made it his business to be as much as possible to see how they could wean themselves off their dependence on oil, because a lot of that oil is coming from the Middle East. A lot of it is coming from Saudi Arabia, which of course has the largest refinery capacity in the world to date. And of course, the nature of the petrodollar is, of course, a major player in terms of investment, in terms of geopolitics all around the world. And so we've seen, of course, the matter of energy being central central to industrialization, to economic development, to politics, to war, effectively around the world, and we certainly have to be mindful as to how critical energy is, of course, in our daily lives, directly because we depend on it, and indirectly because of its importance all around the world. And so in that regard, a country does have to have and certainly needs to take very, very seriously its energy policy. Energy policy drives productivity, and the whole idea of having energy from these various sources is because effectively it gives advantage. The machinery gives you advantage. It allows you to be more productive. It allows you to be able to grow your economy. It affords you comfort. It affords you lots of quality of life. I mean, even right now, for example, we've seen how in some parts of the world we are marveled at, people who are being able to survive in deserts. And a lot of that is possible because of air conditioning and cooling systems. And those cooling systems are driven by energy. So when we look at, of course, the successes of places like Dubai, when we think about cities in the desert, whether it might be Las Vegas or Phoenix, Arizona, and you see what's going on in those places and the millions of people who are able to function and live in those places, it's as a result of energy. That energy which is driving air conditioning, which is a means of controlling the temperature and controlling the environment. And likewise, of course, in very cold environments, the same exists. And so, of course, not too long ago, we saw Europe was in a bit of a crisis as a result of the fact that they were quite dependent on Russian natural gas. And that natural gas was important for the cooling, for heating, particularly during, of course, the winter months. And the spike in the cost of that fuel, the scarcity of it, caused increases in prices, and it meant that many governments had to literally come in to subsidize in some form the gas prices in many European countries, because the average person simply could not afford and would really have to be making choices as to, well, do I warm the house today on a Monday, or do I warm it on a Tuesday, or do I, you had to make some really tough decisions regarding that situation. So, of course, energy is vital in our part of the world, and given the fact that in the Eastern Caribbean, for the most part, we have not been able to identify significant exploitable amounts of fossil fuels, which has been the traditional cheap energy available for the world. Barbados perhaps has been somewhat fortunate in that they did have some exploitation of natural gas and oil fields and whatnot, but in a very small quantity. And of course, the only really major player in the CARICOM region prior to the ascendancy of Guyana was that of Trinidad and Tobago. And even in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, their oil boom has certainly has come down. It's no longer a boom anymore, and they've had to switch. They've had to diversify into natural gas, of course, also coming out of the ground, but that too has certainly had some limitations, even though they made significant investments in LNG gasification plants, so as to allow them to actually export this natural gas, which was still available. So we, of course, generally speaking, do not have that opportunity. And so what we effectively have, perhaps in some regards, has been a blessing, could be a blessing, if in fact it drives us in that direction. And that is the presence of renewables. And renewables are a win-win because one, we've got them, and of course, so that means it can in fact reduce on our overall demand and exposure to the rest of the world. If in fact we can ensure that more and more of our power is actually coming from within our shores, from whether it's sunlight, from whether it's wind, from whether it's geothermal, that certainly is a major, major game changer if in fact we can do that. Now, what has been the challenge there, of course, is that of the cost of the energy. Of course, now in each type of energy, you actually have, you've got a differing of costs. So there is this whole concept of cost comparisons between them, or levelized cost of energy, where you look at each source and determine what it works out to be at the end of the day in terms of the unit cost. So that has been for many years a bit of a challenge. But what we've seen, of course, for the past 2 decades, because we've been seeing a lot of advancement in solar and wind, we've seen the cost of the technology come down considerably. And we've seen the technology itself also become more efficient, which then helps in the overall payback for the investment. So effectively, the installation that you want to put in is becoming more cost competitive. And that, of course, is really important. And we can perhaps say thank you to a large measure the Chinese, because China is now the world's largest producer of solar panels in the world. China is the largest producer of wind turbines in the world. And they're also the largest buyers of their own technology, because they, in fact, are generating the most amount of solar as well as wind in the world. Of course, they are 1.4 billion people and have a voracious appetite for energy, thanks to their large population and the fact that they are the world's factory. So that is driving down the price of technology considerably in this regard. And of course, China is also making considerable inroads into the matter of electric vehicles. And once upon a time, in the very early days of vehicles, they were actually electric. And of course, then the shift came towards running them on gas or diesel. And that's where we have been for the past almost 100 years. We have now seen, of course, a shift now of the world moving more towards electric vehicles. And that, too, is something that we have to look at and embrace, because it therefore means that if you can actually generate enough electricity for your current electricity demand, plus your future demand and increase in growth, whether it's for industry and economic growth, as well as this this part of the energy demand which comes from gas and diesel to run our vehicles, if that also can go electric, you can then see a very important pathway for our future development and energy security. And so it certainly is a very, very interesting period of time that we live in. But of course, there are major shifts that have to happen in terms of mindset, in terms of technology and the uptake of that technology, Of course, we're speaking about, let's say, electric vehicles, and we've got such a long way to go. We've, perhaps don't even have 100 electric vehicles on St. Lucia's roads right about now, whereas you perhaps have close to 70,000 vehicles on the roads in total. So it's going to take quite a while, perhaps, to be able to begin making that transition. But it is a transition that many countries are realizing that they must make. And it is becoming a lot more feasible to be able to do so and cost effective to do so, particularly given the fact that we're not going to be seeing the price of fuel come down. I think it's been hovering about, $80 per barrel for quite some time. I mean, we're not going to be going back to the days of a barrel being $25 or $30. It's not cost effective for the producers to be selling it at that price for certain, and especially, as I mentioned, because of the new sources that you're dealing with, a lot of it is more costly to produce, and so certainly we are going to be in this period where the price of oil is going, yes, stable perhaps, but certainly it's still pretty high overall. And so the shift towards that renewable energy focus is very important for all of us to make. We can continue to have that conversation, but of course we are in fact due to take in our weather report, which is brought to us through the St. Lucia Met services. So we're going to head across to take in our weather report at this time. That's our dish
This has been the Daily Dish.
One tells for your home, I see. Bathroom, kitchen, pantry. Need tells for your balcony. Come down to Tells Plus satisfaction guarantee. Tells Plus, Tells Plus, Tells Plus. Big tells if unbeatable cost. Customer service, A plus. Did all kind of tests. Come down to Tells Plus. We also glad gas and vanity. Books, doors, you'll see. Come down to mind nobody. We got the best tells on island. Trust me. We are located Lance Road in Castries, Bosses Grozile, and Slack Street in Beaufort. Telephone number 453-7939. Tells Plus.
Mixes and ground. Everything you need is on the outside. For the best price and the latest style. Take a little drive down to Island Style car. We got the time to make you go. We got the time to make you say, quality, price, service, choice. It's all an Island Style.
Visit us at our showrooms in Bellarosa, Rodney Bay, on the John Compton Highway, Castries, and behind Ruby's Gas Station on the Library Beaufort Highway. So call us on 450-452 or 453-TILE. Island Style Tile and Bath. When you think tile, think Island Style.
This is Radio Caribbean International. It's now time for the weather news.
And that's all, of course, on the 1.1. It's now time for your weather report as of 12 noon today, presented by Island Style Talamba. The forecast for St. Lucia Valley for the next 24 hours. Winds will be blowing from between the east. Winds will be blowing between the southeast and east near 12 miles per hour or 19 kilometers per hour, becoming lighter at times. The weather fair skies becoming cloudy at times with scattered showers which may be heavy and isolated thunderstorms, mainly over the western and northern portions of the island. The forecast for the San Antilles over the central and southern Windward Islands, partly cloudy to cloudy with scattered showers and isolated thunderstorms. Elsewhere, fair to partly cloudy with a few showers. And a tropical weather outlook. Light winds will persist across the eastern Caribbean region during the next few days. The intertropical convergence zone and a low-level trough system will continue to cause occasional cloudiness Some scattered showers and isolated thunderstorms, mainly over the central and southern Windward Islands during the next 24 hours. A tropical wave located over the eastern tropical Atlantic is moving westward near 6 miles per hour or 9 kilometers per hour. And this was the weather report as of 12 noon today, presented by Island Style Talent Bath.
This has been RCI's Weather News. For more information, call the Weather Hotline at 454-3452. RCI 101 number 1.
Island style. We got the time to make you go. We got the time to make you say, we'll have to make the right choice. Island style. We got the time that will make you happy. Island style. Oh yeah. We make your dream come alive in Island style. We have tiles and thin sets, mixers and ground. Everything you need is on the outside. For the best price and the latest style. Take a little drive down to Island Style Car. We got the time to make you go. We got the time to make you say, quality price, service choice. It's all an Island Style.
Visit us at our showrooms in Belarus, Rodney Bay, on the John Compton Highway, Cass Street, and behind Ruby's Gas Station on the Library Viewfort Highway. Or call us on 450-452 or 453-TILE. Island Style Tile and Bath. When you think tile, think Island Style.
And welcome back to our program here at the Lunchroom on Radio Caribbean International. Of course, the number to call in to tell us what's on your plate today, it is 452-3046. Again, 452-3046. And, of course, you can also message in on our WhatsApp. That is 724-0008. And you can call into that number as well. So we're going to try to go to the phone lines at this time to take in a call. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Lunchroom. What's on your plate today?
Discussion about electric vehicles.
Sorry, caller. I didn't catch. Caller.
About terrain,
Caller.
It might. Yes.
Sorry, I didn't catch the first thing that you said. Could you just start over, please?
Yes. With your discussion about electric vehicles.
Yes.
And the concern I have, because of St. Lucia's terrain, and because at times people might park their vehicles some distance away from their homes.
Right.
It might be difficult for them to actually charge those vehicles from their homes. And then, of course, the option will be to have a sufficient number of fast charging stations around the island. But then again, I'm not sure how efficient those will be. So
well,
I don't know if that will actually affect our transition to EVs.
I mean, that has been a concern that obviously everybody has had in terms of the uptake of electric vehicles. But that has improved greatly. Yes, as you rightly pointed out, the fast charging stations are becoming a lot more prevalent, and the technology is getting better around the world. So that's one shift that is a plus. But as well, I'm not sure in terms of the range, though. I mean, we do take the point that, of course, we do have some difficult terrain. But when you look at perhaps, and this is where maybe some useful profiling of the average driver, the average commuter, and their actual utilization, I suspect we will find that the average St. Lucian driver is driving a lot less, or consuming a lot less on average in terms of fuel than, say, the average American driver.
Okay.
And I suspect that is primarily because of the distances that we're talking about. Most people are not actually going that far. I'm not saying that you don't have some distances that could potentially be challenging if this person is deciding that they want to go around the island on a daily basis. You could potentially have some risks. But overall, I think the vast majority of trips per day are pretty limited in the case of St. Lucia. I think you're gonna find that a lot of it is gonna be, let's say, between Castries and Grosley. That's gonna be dominating a lot of the travel there. Yes, you're gonna have some people who are doing greater distances, but even if you're saying you're doing Castries to Viewfort, back and forth return trip on a daily basis, that is actually still within the range of most of these vehicles EVs that we're seeing coming out right now.
Right.
So I think it's reasonable within our country size to.
Right.
I think it still makes it an attractive proposition, albeit of course we do have the hills to deal with, and of course some people want to have their powerful vehicles to go up hills, but that's getting better as well.
Yes, and what will be the average cost on the electricity bill of actually charging an EV?
Well, when
And
I tried working it out based on the current, and of course it depends on the model of vehicle and the efficiency, of the vehicle. But I think it was actually working out to be about 30% of the current cost.
All right.
To if you were running a similar vehicle on gas, it was working out to be about 30%. But of course, the challenge with, and I should also point out that they generally, the suggestion is that, although I don't have the data, that the maintenance costs of EVs are less over the time, over the life of the vehicle. But the major difference we have right now is that EVs are more expensive. So the upfront cost of the investment is greater for the average person. So that's where I think there is some challenge, albeit we're seeing with the rise of a lot of Chinese manufacturers, EV manufacturers, that the price of those vehicles are actually coming down. They could potentially be competitive, which of course is not good for the U.S. because they're very much about promoting their brands, but that is the way the world is going.
Right. Take care.
Well, thanks very much for that call and question, caller. And of course, very important conversation to have because it is certainly a direction that in fact, I think there is right now a program within the Ministry of Sustainable Development looking at that transition to electric mobility, as it's being termed. Barbados, I think, stands out as one country that has done pretty well in introducing electric buses, and perhaps that sector too is one of those that we really do need to pay a lot of attention to. On a whole, the quality of public transport is important because not only is it a common good, a public good, but it actually, in principle, saves the country tremendously if, in fact, you have an efficient public transport system. So if we are going to be speaking about energy efficiency, part of that energy efficiency journey is not just putting the same number of vehicles that we have on the road now and just making them electric. What needs to also happen is that we need to see a better system of public transport, and that can take maybe different forms, certainly, but a public transport system that is attractive to the majority of people, so that you can actually realize a reduction in the number of car trips that are actually occurring. Because in and of themselves, a car that is traveling with just one person, and you multiply that by 30 cars, right, it can never be as efficient as one bus that is holding 30 individuals and providing a service for those 30 persons. So that is a major shift that also has to be looked at. The matter of ensuring that you have a reliable, efficient public transport system that is green, yes, and that would be the ideal, that you see a transition towards electric buses or green buses. There are some shifts in some places where they're piloting hydrogen fuel buses, but certainly, at least in at least in terms of the electric buses, that would be a major shift in the right direction. In the case of Barbados, they have also made that very same shift. Now, as we do speak about Barbados, in fact, there was a story that I did want to share on the matter of renewable energy. Now, Barbados has been doing pretty well in terms of the push towards introducing renewables on their grid, as well as I mentioned, renewables through the use of on the roads as well, and as well the uptake of electric vehicles in general. So we do have something to learn in terms of their journey thus far, given the fact that they're not very much different in terms of size and population, all things considered. And there's an interesting article that came out just a couple of days ago on the Barbados Nation, and a call being made for a renewable energy investment fund. And that proposal being made by a Barbadian financial analyst. Let me just share that story, and then we can perhaps go back to the phone lines. Barbadian financial analyst Avinash Prasad, who is a special advisor on climate change to the president of the Inter-American Development Bank, the IDB, is proposing the creation of a fund that could quickly double investment in renewable energy in one step. Prasad said that the fund would not focus on new green projects in the developing world, but existing loans local financial institutions already have on their balance sheets for performing renewable energy projects in Latin America and the Caribbean. The fund buys them with a premium that the banks lose if they don't reinvest the proceeds in the sector within a tight period, like 12 to 18 months. This way, we can quickly double renewable energy investments in short shrift, he explained. Quote, and we can do it again and again until we get to the pace we need. It's fluid mechanics, getting water to flow uphill by creating a vacuum at the top of a pipe, end quote. Prasad said his suggestion was based on work being done with the Brazilian G20 presidency on what the G20 can do, given that they account for 80% of emissions. The work behind the foreign exchange liquidity facility launched in Brazil in March. Conversations he had with the executive secretary of the independent high-level expert group on climate finance, Amar, the name is Bhattacharya, about the bank balance sheet problem in India, and discussions with the capital markets team of the IDB. Prasad said the problem the proposed fund would try to solve was, quote, how to accelerate mitigation in large middle-income developing countries where energy demand is growing exponentially. In Latin America and the Caribbean, the stock of locally funded green projects is more than US $25 billion. Though it is discussed more frequently as a success, the equivalent figure in India is smaller but is growing rapidly, he stated. However, the local banks and financial institutions are running out of balance sheets to do many times more, given their size, scarcity of local savings, and concentration levels. Local investment in renewables is a good story, but it is in danger of petering out just as the world needs it to switch to a higher gear. He believed the suggested fund could solve the problem without requiring billions of dollars in unavailable blended finance. The fund will only purchase bank loans backed by the local currency income streams from existing renewable projects. We are not imagining altruistic money or unbuilt projects. These projects exist, and today's financial system likes to refinance existing stuff, the finance specialist explained. The fund will only purchase loans backed by contracts and regulations that allow the borrower to raise prices over time, in line with inflation, as is common in Latin America because of its history of hyperinflation. This means, this means the foreign exchange risk to a foreign investor in our fund is a much lower risk of a damaging decline in a portfolio of real inflation-adjusted exchange rates, not the decline of individual nominal exchange rates, he added. And this piece coming out of the Barbados Nation, this is the quoting the financial analyst Avinash Prasad, who's a special advisor on climate change at the Inter-American Development Bank. And when we also take into consideration exactly what the last caller was raising, finance is a major impediment because with a lot of this requires investment. And if one is to become a prosumer, if one is to perhaps make an investment in, say, a solar photovoltaic installation, if one is going to consider making an investment in an electric vehicle, you've got to be looking at the cost. And part of that is the challenge. The upfront cost is something that a lot of people may not have the space to be able to go out and actually borrow the required amount of money. If you're looking at, overall, maybe one could argue that over the lifetime of the project of buying a vehicle, an electric vehicle, you'll be saving more. But the reality is that you've got to find upfront perhaps a slightly higher rate, a higher amount of money, borrow more through the bank to be able to purchase this vehicle. So there's a greater upfront risk and a greater amount of money that people have to find upfront to make those investments. Likewise, if it's a solar PV system, you may be hearing that it could pay for itself. The payback period is 7 years or 8 years. And of course, that means beyond that period of 7 years or 8 years, the savings that you would have realized by making the investment has actually, it's paid off for itself. But the point is, you've got to take that upfront risk in terms of the amount of money that you've got to borrow. And so that's where, for a lot of projects, this upfront hurdle has to be achieved. And that tends to be a significant scare and a significant barrier for a lot of individuals, even whether you're looking at it from a small scale investment to at a household level, to even large businesses, or to perhaps even at a national scale. It's also an impediment. So the need to be able to drive and bring in investment into the sector is a major part of the challenge. And in all honesty, when you look at around the world too, our market is not a very attractive one because we're pretty small by the looks of things. And you can easily appreciate that the investors are looking for these very large projects usually, where they can, when you crunch the numbers, at the end of the day, they're talking about returns possibly in the hundreds of millions of dollars. That's what they probably want to hear, and that's what would excite the average investor. And so when you are dealing with a very small country like ours, and across the region very much the same, we aren't very, very attractive for some of these projects. So, if you want to think of it from the perspective of the world, the entire world utilizes somewhere in the region of 29,000 terawatt hours. And of course, you'll be asking, what is a terawatt? And if you think of, you might have heard of a kilowatt. And then, of course, if you multiply that by 1,000, you're now into the domain of megawatts, which is generally what we would speak about within our current scale, because in terms of at a grid level here in St. Lucia, we'd be speaking about megawatts. For instance, our peak demand is somewhere in the region of 60 megawatts. But then we now multiply that by 1,000, and then you enter the gigawatts, and then you multiply that again by 1,000, and then you start speaking about terawatts. So effectively, 1,000,000 megawatts is a terawatt, and the world is using in total generating somewhere around 29,000 terawatt hours. And of course, China being the largest generator, I should say, is in the region of 8,800 terawatt hours. The United States is less than half of that, with about 4,300 terawatt hours. And those are pretty much the two largest players. The next largest would be India, interestingly enough, with about 1,800 terawatt hours. Where does St. Lucia fall within its terawatt hour usage? Well, our annual usage is 0.4 terawatt hours, just for the sake of comparison. So we're very, very, very small when it looks at a global level. And so that is also a part of the challenge in terms of gaining enough interest and momentum when we're speaking of projects within small island developing states. The modality of finance has to be looked at within a different context, because it's the gains are not as great as in these larger domains, larger territories, and we may not always be able to find sufficient numbers of investors or to necessarily come in and to make those investments. So it's not to say that it's an impossible situation, but we certainly do need to figure out the financing, and the point that is being made by Dr. Avinash Prasad is important, because sometimes it is challenging to get the finance up and running. There are these entities out there like the Green Climate Fund, for example, which we hear about sometimes, which is supposed to be able to provide funding for climate adaptation and these types of investments, you would think. But the timelines for getting projects through some of these can be inordinately long, 4, 5, 6 years sometimes before a project is even approved, and far less actually even constructed or implemented. And so that, of course, is the point that he's making, that this is the time when our countries, our islands, as the central bank governor was talking about, you want to talk about doubling economic growth in 10 years, but how do you do that if it's going to take 10 years to get that project completed? So that's the challenge that is at play in terms of getting renewables going and making it an attractive option, an attractive reality for us here in the Caribbean, in the Eastern Caribbean. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately, and so we're going to have to continue this conversation perhaps on a program tomorrow, and we'd hope you can join us for that as well. I'm your host, Calix George Jr., saying goodbye.